Hi everyone, SaneMain here. This video is brought to you by a donation from Mr. Anonymous, and here's what he has to say. Hi SaneMain, I want to bring up a pattern that I've noticed lately, especially in customer service. I'm not sure if I'm odd for paying attention to this, but my whole life up until about 2 or 3 years ago, I remember being polite simply because it seemed like the right thing to do. If I stood at a store counter, said hello and smiled, it wasn't for any other reason than to basically be civil and be polite. It seems that greeting women, and I'm including various women of various ages, is somehow socially unacceptable nowadays. I admit that I'm not the most attractive man in the world, slightly smaller than average, and look very young for my age. But there are many times I'm surprised to be greeted by beautiful women and admit some are actually rare exceptions on being polite. But in many instances I've experienced very rude behavior by overweight, unattractive females, just as equally by attractive ones. Sometimes I wonder if they're already thinking that I'm on my way to asking them out on a date. I've had relationships with a few beautiful women, but after experiencing female nature, and before realizing MGTOW, I began to wonder if it wasn't just me, but perhaps society somehow raising an entire generation of female entitlement. Whenever I hear the women of World War II who are mostly grandparents or great-grandparents, or I see old movies with them compared to movies now, it's hard for me to believe the changes. I guess the same thing could be said about men, but I can't imagine women behaving back then the way that women behave today. But coming back to the beginning, regarding this pattern, is that many women in service areas look very angry and very bitter. In fact, the more genuinely happy I'm feeling, it seems that more women are angry, so much so that I often wish I went to another cafe or restaurant. Perhaps other men have experienced this in one form or another. I'll be curious to hear your thoughts and others with regards to the comment section. Thank you for your videos and cheers, Sandman. Well, Mr. Anonymous, thanks for your donation as well as your topic request. You're most likely a polite and nice guy because you've had those values instilled and socialized into you. Do you really think you were just like that because of your nature, but I'm sure that your parents had to work very hard to raise you to basically have manners and not be a spoiled little shit? If you greet a random woman and you're not up to her dating standards, even if you're just being friendly, she's obviously going to think you're about to ask her out. The last thing she wants is a smaller guy to ask her out. She's thinking to herself, you're not a man, you're a manlet, and for her, you probably look like a mini-me version of the guy that she really wants. The overweight and fat women that you run into are probably rude and angry because you didn't bring steak for them, so they can spit out the bones back at you from their pie holes. As for the unattractive women, someone once recently told me that ugly women are the new fat women. Fat women, it seems, no one wanted to ride, and now they're more popular to ride than mopeds in some parts of America. The next group of women seeking social fame will be the unattractive as part of some ugly acceptance movement. I thought that people were nuts when they suggested to me that buck-toothed women with a perm and a pizza face would be looking for love in all the wrong places. I thought that even gay John Travolta wouldn't be wanting to sing to them, but boy was I wrong. Mr. Anonymous, you're probably dealing with some of these new women that are part of the ugly acceptance movement. It's not our society that's raised these new muff monsters devouring men in all the wrong places. The majority of women everywhere are now rude. Women are the enemies of common courtesy these days. Even if you were raised to be a polite dude, when enough women have treated you like tampon toilet trash because they can and because they were raised to do so with no manners, then you start to see no point in having those values as well. That's probably why people in Germany are so anal retentive about customs and rules, because they understand that if you make exceptions for one person, then others will follow suit, and soon enough there'll be social anarchy. That makes me wonder how in the world they're welcoming in migrants with no manners. But with regards to Western women in general, they feel like there should be more exceptions made for them because they are special, and this often leads to a culture of social entitlements. Fat and ugly acceptance, as I mentioned, are mostly about giving women involved in such insane movements the reasons to basically act like a number one a-hole. You also mentioned that everywhere you look you see angry bitches, and of course women are angry. They don't really want the responsibility of having to go to work, it was more like a shit test that we failed. Taking care of the children was once more than enough to keep them occupied. My little female cousins in their teens, I asked them what they thought they would do after high school, and they tell me they have absolutely no idea. One is saying that she doesn't want to get married. I think that people everywhere are becoming like the stereotypical rude people in New York. There is no time to be polite and courteous because we're constantly hustling to pay the bills, especially with the gig economy. Women in the service industries are bitter because they were promised that they would be YouTube and reality television stars, and now they're stuck serving coffee to women that remind them of their mothers. I tend to find the opposite with women and happiness. The less happy or content they are, the more they pretend to be happy. It's quite amusing to watch as they try harder and harder to prove to everyone that their life is worth more than a roll of quarters. But the truth is, they would be happier if they took that same roll of quarters and basically shoved it up inside of them like a good quality dildo. I have old books from the late 19th and early 20th century filled with rules as to how to wash the floors, set the table, when to shake someone's hand or hold the door. Women are naturally politically correct creatures. If you don't distract them and make them anal retentive about how to set the table properly or fashion or some other useless nonsense, then they'll become anal retentive about male-female behavior. You have to make them feel bad about their shortcomings and beat down their self-esteem, otherwise they go after men and try to shame us and destroy our self-esteem instead. All these rules that women learned used to basically mean that there was a codified standard for communications and politeness. I have two 90-year-old third cousins in San Francisco that are awesome to talk to and are in fact more hip and trendy than my parents because they use the internet and have actually kept up with the world. But they were raised in a world with manners, and you can actually tell they were socialized that way back in the 1950s and 60s. It's like watching that film, Catch Me If You Can. People in the 1960s were incredibly naive and trustworthy because everyone understood that you trust people until they give you a reason not to. Your experience, Mr. Anonymous, is much different. Today you go up to a woman and you just stand in her proximity and she doesn't trust you, and you haven't done anything yet, and you probably never will. Women have changed because society has changed. Men remain, for the most part, blue pill and trust women because it's part of our biological imperative. Women, on the other hand, go along with herd behavior, and if the majority of women out there are bitches, that becomes the socially acceptable behavior. In the past, women could hate your guts, but they were still nice and polite, and I could get along with them perfectly because I was raised as a young kid in the system that they built. I was probably the last generation to go through that type of training back in the 1980s. There were still enough grandparents around to instill good quality behaviors in the young people. Also, Mr. Anonymous, you mentioned that women hate you or are hostile when you show them you're happy. Of course they're like that. You see them serving you coffee and mopping the floor, and they would rather be served instead of serving others. Women used to be forced to serve others, and if they raised spoiled little monsters, the creatures that crawled out of their vagina wouldn't support them into their old age, but instead made them run for the border. So women teaching their sons and daughters to be nice meant that their kids treated them well into old age. There's a certain unspoken social arrangement and codependency that was created back then. But with welfare, social security, and pensions, the adults, especially in the boomer generation, no longer had to be nice to their kids to guarantee survival into their old age. So they became increasingly narcissistic when compared to previous generations. So it makes sense that the millennial generation is the most narcissistic and the women have no manners. The only way this is really going to change is if social welfare programs like the dole and Social Security go bust. People are afraid of losing their pensions, and America, as well as the rest of the world, is going broke. But at the end of the day, that will bring about positive outcomes to family values as well as human relationships once again. Otherwise, people will get meaner and meaner, and as the robots, software, and the gig economy take away the higher-paying jobs, people are going to get meaner and nastier to each other, fighting for survival in the economy. Recently, I was reading that if you want to maintain a middle-class lifestyle with all the equivalent goods and services that come with it, you need to make roughly $150,000 a year as a family. Most people are not making anywhere near that, and both rents and tuition continue to go up and up. So as lifestyles fall in the West, no wonder women are becoming unhappier because they measure their success in life based on material possessions. Many women are now saying they measure life in experiences versus the things that they own. Ironically, the experiences cost $10,000 to $20,000 with regards to vacations, where they're happy and then when they get home they become miserable again because they fall into debt. At least when you own a television you can enjoy it long term instead of for a week or two. Mr. Anonymous, I think you came here to vent about women in general. But what actually brought you up here is very important. Many of us feel nostalgic for a time when we could actually talk to women and she didn't look at you like a monster trying to hit on her. Instead, she would smile politely and tell you that she wasn't interested. That would diffuse the situation quite nicely, and you could still feel good about yourself as a man, and she maintained her sweet and innocent image, and that was that. Today you just walk through a mall and you'll see women looking at you with what seems to be snarky facial expressions that say, "Sorry, my little manlet, but I'm not interested in anything you have to offer," because she tells you to fuck off with her eyes. Women have always wanted to tell men to F off with their eyeballs, but in the past, I guess their mothers beat that impulse out of them at the age of 3 or 4 with a belt. Instead, they instilled more useful qualities like being nice, welcoming, accommodating, nurturing, among others, even if they didn't want to be. Women knew that if their children married good partners, then the odds were pretty good that they, the grandparents, would also see an upgrade in lifestyle. This I consider the original trickle-down economics, where adults from 30 to 50 earn the majority of income and trickle it down to their kids and grandparents. No one would hire the asshole, nor would they actually date them. So women were looking after their own best interests by providing a social or cultural education to their own kids that revolved around the perception of respect. Even if you hated someone, it wasn't something that you shared. Society functioned well like that for many centuries, and then we got unsustainable pension schemes, and that relationship was lost forever. Another thing that I've noticed is that the nicer-looking women tend to be better behaved, while the ugly and fat women have a chip on their shoulder, or at least they did until they decided to eat it. I think the reason for that is because the women that look normal are actually raised in a much better way than the oversized ham-beasts with the face of a pit bull. You'd probably be mean and nasty too if your face only looked good when you were actually howling at the moon. Anyways, that's all I've got to say. Thanks again, Mr. Anonymous, for your donation as well as your topic. Don't forget to check out the MGTOW mystery link, because it shows just how much women have changed, and also please smash that like button below this video. As for everyone else out there, please follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook to get tomorrow's video today. Thanks for taking your daily dose of red pills. And remember, a red pill a day keeps the bitchy Starbucks baristas away. So enjoy the rest of your day, and cheers.